We don't give enough importance to this aspect of a relationship. Intimacy is not like an afterthought. Having an intimate connection with your spouse is a major part of a healthy relationship. It is going to ebb and flow. The level of how affectionate you were, how often you were intimate, how much time you had for each other is not going to be the same in year 1 as it will be at year 5 or year 10. And sometimes it goes, very often actually, goes back up. When you have kids, those are the hardest years for the marriage. Those are the years where spouses feel the most disconnected and the least affectionate and intimate with one another. The older the kids get, the less physically dependent they are on you, meaning like they can feed themselves, they can go to the bathroom by themselves, they can fall asleep by themselves. So usually around age 4 or 5, when the youngest kids hit around age 4 or 5, is when the ability to connect is easier again. Unfortunately for a lot of couples, we're out of habit, we're out of practice, we fought so much during that difficult time, we don't care anymore, right? But it's a need that Allah created in us. Men and women have a need to be intimate, to be connected. And not fulfilling that need hurts us. Individually, it hurts us. It opens us up to sin. It opens us up to, unfortunately, it's very, very, very easily accessible to view pornography, to commit zina of the eyes, of the body, to fantasize, and all of that is pleasing to shaitan. But also, it disconnects us from each other. Physiologically, skin-to-skin contact with your spouse bonds you, which again is why this is only in Islam jaiz in a halal marriage. When you have contact with a non-mahram, when you have contact with someone that you are not married to, you are going to bond with them, whether or not you intend to. Whether or not you thought it was a harmless friendship, or me and my cousin are just close friends, like you're going to get bonded if you spend alone time with someone. If you are casual about hugging or kissing or holding hands and things like that, it's going to bond you. And it needs to bond you to your spouse. When you keep yourself from that, you're not only hurting yourself, you're hurting the marriage. Intimacy is a hallmark of a healthy relationship. It creates a shared sense of safety, trust, and understanding. Emotional and physical intimacy are strongly linked. Alhamdulillah, as Muslims, it's also a means of gaining reward. It gauges the health of the relationship. Intimacy is an expression of love and closeness. So again, holding hands, kissing, physical intimacy looks different for different people, but serves as a protective factor against marital distress. Healthy communication is key to healthy intimacy. Husbands and wives, men and women, have different needs at different times, sometimes at different times of day, sometimes at different situations. Sometimes people want physical comfort. If I'm sad, if I'm not feeling well, if I'm lonely, I might want my spouse to give me a hug or sit next to me. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes I had a disagreement with somebody, my sister and I, had a big fight, or my mom is really mad at me, and I need space. I don't want physical comfort. There's no way to know that unless we discuss it and we're honest with each other. We have to be willing to share that that's something that for me, I need to be in the headspace for. I'm not interested right now. But at the same time, it's not okay to reject somebody's effort. So if your spouse is trying to give you a hug and you're like, that's the opposite of what I need, be appreciative. Thank you. I understand that you're trying to help me feel better, but honestly, it would be better for me if I could just have a little time on my own. Right? When we feel personally offended by that, unfortunately, again, that's from shaitan. It makes you feel rejected. And if you're harsh or rude or mean in the way you say that, you are being rejecting. There's many layers of intimacy. Intellectual sharing, knowledge and ideas, having conversations. And again, when your kids are little, if you have children, the first few years of their lives, you have the least headspace and bandwidth for conversation, but it's still needed. And that's when sometimes we have to schedule that. Even if it means we have to hire a sitter or drop the kids off at grandma's house, or make efforts like we stay up late. I'm exhausted, I want to go to bed when they go to bed, but once a week we both stay up late and we have dinner, just the two of us. Or once a week we get up early and we stay up after Fajr and we share a cup of tea together. So at least on some level we're still having conversation. Because otherwise it turns into very transactional. Was this bill paid? Yes, it was. Did you pick him up? Yes, I did. Did you drop this off? Yes, right? And that's it. And it becomes easy to get into the habit of that's the only conversation we're having. Emotionally sharing pain and joy builds vulnerability. Being vulnerable in front of your spouse builds closeness and trust. You can't be vulnerable with somebody that you don't trust and you don't feel safe with. But if you're not going to share your fear, you're not going to share your failures and disappointments, then you're also not allowing yourself to be vulnerable with someone. Physically, so all forms of non-sexual touch, holding hands, sitting close to each other, but doing tasks together. It's not romantic, but folding laundry together, right? Going to exercise together, taking walks together, right? Like doing dishes together. Any of that allows us to be in physical proximity, and those are tasks that we can maybe do mindlessly and allows us to be connected. Spiritual intimacy is also important. Exploring meaning, purpose, and goals, discussing and sharing with each other, like watching lectures together. Alhamdulillah, again, we live at a time where, mashallah, and this community, anybody I would say in Chicagoland, mashallah, we're very blessed that we have a lot of our masajid are very active. We have amazing scholars and speakers. Like, date night doesn't have to be a movie. Date night doesn't have to be we go to a fancy restaurant, right? It could be that we got a babysitter or we found childcare and we attended the same lecture and then we talked about how that was. We talked about our opinions of it. We talked about what we learned. That's a way of spiritual connection. Praying salah together, even if it's not possible 5 times a day. Is it possible once a day? Is it possible a few times a week? Whether or not you're praying to make dua together, or reminding each other, like, hey, once a week, let's sit together. We are doing our own things. We're on different juz, but we're going to take 15 minutes and read Quran together. Holding each other accountable, like, oh, this week you didn't read Quran, let's do it now, right? Those are ways of building spiritual intimacy. And I've had spouses who through the course of it, like one of the most telling, or most significant for me was during the course of several months of therapy, during one of these vulnerable moments, he admitted that he felt really ashamed that he was not good at reading Quran. That he had never learned properly with the teacher, he had learned through family members, and she had much better tajweed, and she pronounced so beautifully, and it made him feel ashamed that he wasn't a good reciter, and she had no idea he felt that way. She had no idea. But when they started sharing and sitting together to read Quran, he admitted, I almost always only read the translation. Even in my head, I don't read the actual Arabic because I'm so bad at it, right? That vulnerability and how supportive she was and how comforting she was and how much she appreciated it significantly built the trust in their marriage. And it was interesting because he said, I never imagined I would ever share that. I was so embarrassed by it, I don't even think about it, right? But mashallah, like spending time together naturally allowed that conversation to come out. Care, concern for, and responsiveness to the needs of your partner is also intimacy. Nurturing non-sexual physical connection and touch, giving a hug, holding hands, right? Sitting close to each other. Consistent and mutually fulfilling sexual relationship and mutual willingness to consider sexual intimacy as a service and sadaqah. Ideally, both people are in the mood, both people have a positive experience, both people enjoy it, wonderful. Sometimes one may not. For one, it may be an act of duty versus an act of emotional connection. That's a reality. It's a very unromantic reality, but it is a reality, right? Stress affects men and women differently. Physical health issues affect you differently. Some medications can affect you differently. If you're unable to be intimate with your spouse, you need to resolve that. That's not okay to leave alone. I work with couples every year who will admit that it's been several months into the marriage. I think the longest I ever worked with was a couple that admitted it had been 3 years and they had never consummated. They were affectionate, they cared for each other, but it was such an overwhelming problem at that point, they didn't know how to get help, they didn't know what to do about it, and it just built and built and built. And to me, that's not any different from any other medical issue, because at that point it is a medical issue. Whether it's for the husband or the wife, at that point it's a medical issue. You need to speak to a medical physician. You might need medication, you might need an exam or have a procedure performed, you might need therapy, physical therapy, you might need psychotherapy, but we need an intervention. And every single time, the person who felt like they were the issue or they had the problem will try to overcompensate in other ways, not speak up about, it's okay that you're asking me to do this task, or I'm going to try to, forgive everything that happens because there's this big thing that I'm not doing for you. And the other person believes very genuinely that I'm being patient, I'm being compassionate, I'm not forcing anybody to do anything against their will. Neither of those is healthy. We need to be compassionate. Several months into the marriage, that's not compassion anymore, right? That's not helping anybody. Several years into the marriage, now we're damaging the relationship. So that's why I'm just being very open about that is something that happens. It's awkward, it's difficult, it's embarrassing. You do not need to tell your friends and family. You should not tell. The private relationship between husband and wife, anything that happens in the bedroom is haram to share. Unless you need help. And help is not your mom or your auntie or your grandmother, right? Help is a scholar, help is a therapist, help is a physician. Somebody who can actually do something about this problem, not just commiserate with you or be shocked, right? So whichever end you're on about that problem, whether it's the husband who can't or the wife who can't, it happens both ways. But there needs to be help, and it needs to be from a professional source that can help you and guide you, inshallah. But you have to be able to have healthy intimacy in a marriage. Both spouses have a haqq from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be fulfilled sexually in a marriage. It's not a one-way thing. But we're not always going to crave it, desire it at the same time or in the same way. And that's also okay. So there's an earlier slide about, sometimes a double standard exists. Yeah, sometimes it does. Because if your wife needs to be in the headspace and things need to be set up and the day needs to go easier and the chores got done quickly, that's the only way that she can be in that headspace, and the husband needs like a minute notice, then those are very different needs, right? The time of day sometimes matters. The situation matters. Not everybody is comfortable being intimate, for example, if we're visiting somebody else's home, right? Or if there's something going on, or maybe sometimes there's something happening where I'm not comfortable. It's not necessarily like harmful for me, but I'm not comfortable because I'm having a problem with something, or cosmetically or medically or whatever. We need to be able to have healthy conversations about this, but your spouse's needs have to be respected. It is sinful to deny your spouse their need for intimacy without a valid Sharia reason. And there are only a very small handful of valid Sharia reasons to deny your spouse, right? So with fard fasting, if your spouse is craving intimacy and you're fasting from Ramadan, it is haram to break your fast. So there's no call on you to break your fast, right? If your wife is during her monthly cycle or postpartum bleeding, it is haram to have intimacy. If being physically intimate and having intercourse is going to cause physical pain or damage you in some way, if you have a broken pelvis, you have a fractured leg, you just had surgery, it is not haram then at that point to decline your spouse. But in other contexts, it's not convenient for me, I'm tired, I'm not in the mood, I'm annoyed with you, I want you to know I'm annoyed with you. None of those are valid Sharia reasons. And if your spouse is frustrated with you, or God forbid they commit sin because of this, there will be sin on you too. It is very important to have healthy intimacy. Does not mean that it's always going to be equal. It may look very different, but both people have a right to have their needs met and to feel fulfilled. Differences in libido is very normal. Men and women have very different libidos at different ages. Sometimes for a woman, the time of the month where she is on her cycle may affect it. Time of life may affect it, perimenopausal versus post. Physical health can very much affect it. The idea that when you're older, you no longer have a libido is false. Men and women both can continue to have a libido and have a need in their 60s, 70s, 80s. What is more common is because of physical health problems, diabetes, arthritis, chronic pain, and the medication for these things, those may lower our libido. Or those may lower our the pleasure that we get from it, or the craving for that connection. But in two healthy adults, you may have a healthy libido and a healthy sexual drive even into your 70s and 80s. So the idea that we're older, we shouldn't want it anymore, or we don't need it anymore is false. Allah did not create our bodies that way. Intimacy may not be a priority for somebody who has a lower drive. These individuals can feel fulfilled in a relationship without frequent sex, but people with a higher drive can feel very unfulfilled without more frequent intimacy. So people ask, like, how do we balance that? Being unfulfilled or feeling disregarded leads to problems in the marriage, leads to making you vulnerable to shaitan and vulnerable to sin. So if one person is feeling unfulfilled, that level is what needs to be prioritized. The other person may not need that level, but they still need to respect the needs of their spouse. There are differences in drive. So consider the needs of your partner, explore degrees of intimacy, nurture non-sexual intimacy, develop a service-oriented approach, meaning like even if I don't need intimacy and my spouse does, what are ways that I can fulfill my spouse's needs? Consider life circumstances. Be willing to be patient. Be willing to have compassion. If you know your spouse has not slept in 3 days, the kids have been sick and they were up with them the whole time, or your spouse is extremely stressed at work right now, they haven't been feeling well, they're recovering from being sick, like those are realities that we need to consider. And being merciful to each other, again, is going to please Allah. You have a right to demand intimacy, absolutely. But if you are forgiving, if you are merciful, if you are compassionate, if you are patient with your spouse, that is also going to earn you reward. Remember that the relationship has reciprocal connection to the emotional, like physical has a connection to the emotional one. Both need to be nurtured. You can't have a healthy physical relationship if there is not a healthy emotional relationship. Maintain a positive attitude towards your sexual relationship. If you're looking at it as a chore, if you're looking at it as a duty or obligation, people will say, I never said it, I never did anything, but your spouse will know. Your spouse will know. Your spouse will feel hurt and eventually will feel more and more disconnected. Mutual desire and willingness are fundamental to be able to have an enjoyable and pleasurable sexual life. Develop all the facets of intimacy in your relationship. Again, more than one. So spiritual, emotional, the physical connection is very important, but the other ones are also very important. Remember that men and women have different approaches. Men and women have different drives. People's drives and libido change in age, change because of health, change because of stress, change because of circumstances. It's very rare when both people are on the same page. And that's also a very unromantic reality, but it is a reality. Reach an agreement on ways to accept or decline desires. So many couples will talk about when my spouse said, no, thank you, I don't want to, I'm not in the mood, even in the politest way, the hurt they felt, the rejection they felt, kept them from wanting to approach again. Or made them feel embarrassed, made them feel hurt, and they just stopped at all, completely. Right? Find ways, even if it's code words, even if it sounds silly, to do it where there isn't going to be that aspect of I'm rejecting you. Right? Maybe I'm not in the mood for this, and maybe I'm okay with that. But if it's being said in a way that makes me feel that you're rejecting me, that's going to cause a bigger problem. Changes in your routine are very normal. Again, in the earlier stages of marriage, being intimate multiple times a week is very normal. Being intimate more often when we're on vacation, when we're in a relaxed environment are very normal. But the older we get, the more stress we have, the more responsibility we have, it absolutely can affect the relationship. It can affect that desire. It doesn't mean we love each other less. It doesn't have to mean that we enjoy each other less. It doesn't have to mean that this is less important to us. But if you're feeling unfulfilled, if you're feeling rejected and you're not speaking up about it, it's going to cause fights, it's going to cause resentment, and that's going to get carried more and more and more frequently into the bedroom. Destructive cycle of a lot of couples is that there is ugly fighting. The fighting is not happening in a respectful way. The fighting is getting toxic, and what I mean by that is that we're using bad language, we're using vulgar language, we're insulting each other, we're insulting each other's families. Resentment is building. Even though you apologized, you admitted you shouldn't have done that, how dare you say that about my dad? How dare you bring this thing up that was so hard for me and you're throwing it in my face now, right? Now, I don't want to be close to you. I don't want to hug you. I don't want to sleep in the same bed with you. I'm going to come to bed after you fall asleep. I'm going to face the other way. I'm going to keep the distance there. Once that starts, it's very hard to break out of. So if my spouse has apologized and we're trying to be okay, we need to also be okay in the bedroom. If I'm feeling unsafe with my spouse, if I'm feeling harm from my spouse, if I'm feeling like the way my spouse is intimate with me hurts me, physically or emotionally hurts me, it humiliates me, upsets me, we need to talk about that. Staying quiet about that is just going to make you distance yourself more. Again, assume good of one another, assume that's not intentional, but if you're telling your spouse that like, this doesn't work for me, or I'm not comfortable with that, and you're not offering any suggestions, then they're not necessarily going to know what to do with that information. And that can be very awkward for a lot of people. It can be very embarrassing to talk about sometimes, even with your spouse of many years. But unless you're going to openly discuss that, the idea that they should just figure it out is not reasonable.